Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Sebbing and it is Stashin with Stephanie time. That Stashin with Stephanie is our subscription club where we send you 10 fat quarters for $29.99 a month plus shipping. Plus you get a free pattern, plus you get an exclusive discount code that you can use to get additional fabric to either make the quilt that we are going to be doing in today's video, to supplement your bundle and turn it into a quilt kit, or yardage sometimes if that's what you want, and then you can have fun and enjoy at home. Plus when you join, you get access to all of our other Stashin with Stephanie patterns that we've released to date. It is, I think, almost a $300 value now because there's so many patterns that are available, and you get an exclusive discount code that you can use in my book, Fat Quarter Workshop, which includes our 10 most popular Stashin with Stephanie patterns that are now only available in the book, and also 2 exclusives that were never available anywhere else. So it's a great deal. You get a lot of freebies right when you join. If you're interested in joining though, you need to get the full kit because this bundle has already shipped to our subscribers, and so you would not be getting this. You'll be getting the bundle for next month. It's going to be a free spirit line. We're very excited about it, but this is not the bundle that you would receive. So get a full kit if you are just joining and you want this fabric specifically. So back to this, and then also while I'm chatting about that, our subscribers get first dibs on it. So I don't know for sure that we're going to have full kits this month, depending on how voraciously our subscribers eat up all the extra fabric. So it's a great opportunity to get in there, get first dibs, and we've been selling out of this every single month for the past several months. So sometimes if you're not a member, you're not able to get the project, and so you definitely want to check it out so you can get first dibs on all this lovely fabric. All right, let's take a look at this month's collection, then we'll get in on today's tutorial. It's a super fast one, a little bit challenging because we're going to be doing some 4-at-a-time flying geese, but that's really the only gonna challenge you a little bit portion of it. There's going to be hardly any seams to match. There's going to be hardly any points, or no points to match actually. So it's a really great introduction to those flying geese without having to get super complicated with a triangle quilt. So I think you guys will enjoy it, and it also makes great use of this fabric because we're able to have a lot of the pieces be large. So if you have a collection at home where you just don't want to cut it up into teeny tiny little pieces, this is a good option for you and that bundle. So this month we are working with Ariel by Tamara Kate for Windham Fabrics. It is really pretty. It is a lot of flying things, so little moths and bugs and things like that. It's a very springy line, so it is really a great one to sort of kind of pull you out of those winter doldrums and work on something really fun. And they do a great job of mixing those big pretty prints with the ones that are the kind of the supporting players to help make those big ones shine. So let's take a little bit closer look here. This one is like stunning. So when my husband saw this one, he was like, that one's really sharp. And I said, do you think you ever thought you'd be saying that about fabric before you went into business with me on this? And he didn't, but this one looks really sharp. They got this really deep blue background with the almost like puke green color, but it looks great with it. With that citron, it really pops. It's a very underrated color, one of my favorites. And then we've got different flying bugs, some nice pretty butterflies and moss. And then this is one of those ones that is a really good supporting player. It kind of looks like little flight paths of our little flying creatures in different colors that are repeated throughout the line. So it looks good with a lot of the bigger prints, but it gives the eye a place to rest and then also helps support the bigger prints. This one is really pretty. I snagged a little bit of this for my daughter who is obsessed with butterflies. It's just lots of really big, beautiful butterfly prints. And we can't have anything in the sky that's fun and bright without having a good rainbow, so we're gonna see this one again. Here's that same one that we saw in navy, but with a nice light background. So it's also really pretty like that. We're back to that butterfly, but again, different colorway, so it makes it look completely different. And of course, all our flying little creatures wouldn't survive without some pollen, and so we've got some nice flowers in here. More rainbows and more of a peachy background. This one is really great. This is just a great supporting player with those little zigzag flight lines. More of our flowers. And this is the same as that first print again, this time with that really bold orange background. It is really nice. More rainbows. more butterflies, tinier butterflies. And this is like really like a limey green. It's very almost neon, but it looks really good with some of these other yellows. And then we've got that nice background print to help it make everything else shine. All right, so now we're gonna take a look at the process of actually creating the block. There really isn't that much to do. We just have to create some 4 at a time flying geese and then attach it to a large square in the center to create the floating lantern that we're gonna be creating. Now, one thing that you do wanna kind of pay attention to is the way we've written the pattern is you're gonna separate out your squares or your fat quarters that you wanna have be your squares versus the fat quarters you want to be your flying geese. And what I did was I picked the ones that have the big prints that look good big to be my squares because they're going to be a nice good size square. We're going to get to really see a lot of that print. And then I picked ones that are more like this to be my flying geese because those are going to be a little bit smaller. They don't need to be the big massive print. They just need to support the big massive print by working with it in color. So that is a good way to mix and match when you're taking a look and deciding what you're going to use where. Take a look and see what really would do well if I made it big and what would be perfectly fine if we kept it small and separate it out that way. So to make 4 at a time flying geese, it looks a little weird if you've never done it before, but it's a very accurate way of doing it as long as you follow the steps correctly. If you're finding that things are not coming out the way you need to be, you're probably not sewing an accurate 1/4 inch stitch, or in this case a scant 1/4 inch stitch, or maybe you didn't cut correctly, or you didn't press right. So one of those steps didn't go right for you. So if you're doing it for the first time, I recommend practicing on some scrap fabric that you have hanging around until you can diagnose which one of those things are going wrong. So I'm going to go over those with you so that way if that's one of you, then you can diagnose it. So the first thing I've done is I made sure that I've cut everything to the correct size. We're going to have 1 large square and 4 small ones. Now I'm going to take and I'm going to make a mark on the wrong side of the fabric going from the point to the point. Now when we used to be able to do classes in person, one thing I would notice people would do with this is they wouldn't get it right to the point. So what you want to do is make sure you're angling that pen in. If you're going straight up and down or definitely to the side, you're not actually going to be in contact with that ruler and you're not going to be going down the center, which you absolutely need to do. Now I'm going to go over this a bunch of times so you can see it really well on camera. So here you can see my point is going right to those corners. That's another thing you want to make sure that you do, because if you are not on the corner and you think, okay, I'll eyeball it when I get there, most of the time people don't. They follow the line and they don't compensate to go across from that. So make sure you're paying really close attention when you're doing that. All right, now I'm going to do the same thing with my other 4. All right, so now we're going to take just 2 of these and we're going to align them with the corners, making sure that we've got right sides together. So first I'm going to line that up with my corner and my edges, and I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. Now when I'm doing this and I've got a whole stack of them, I just have a stack of these next to my sewing machine and a stack of the big ones, and I'm just putting them on as I sew. But if you're doing this for the first time, it might be a good idea to pin this in place just until you get the hang of it. So if you're going to pin, here's how you should do it. You've got your top all lined up there, so I'm going to pin across that because we need to pin where we're going to sew, and we're going to be sewing down this side all the way to the tip here, and then we're going to come back up the other side. So next I'm going to pin down here. Now here's another part that's important. Your line should be going straight through there. And if it's not, then if these are off some, then that might be a reason why you're having trouble when it comes time to put it together, because it got off just a little bit. So make sure that that line is continuing from one tiny square all the way down to the other. Now if you're doing this again for the first time, go ahead and put a pin right over that to make sure that those points all stay together. So typically when we sew something, what we're going to do is we're going to set up our 1/4 inch or a scant 1/4 inch seam, and then we're going to line the presser foot up with the edge of the fabric. Well, for this one, what we're going to do is we're eventually going to cut down this line. So what you want to do is you want to pretend like that's the edge of your fabric. So you're going to line your foot up with that center line. Now if you've got a foot that has one of those little guides on it, I really hate those for piecing. Now the reason why is because the guide will hit your pin before you really should be removing your pin. So you either have to pin from the other side, or you have to take a chance that it'll stay put between when you have to remove your pin and your guide hits it, and let me tell you, most of the time it doesn't. So if you're having piecing issues where things aren't coming together right, try switching to one of these feet that doesn't have the guide, and you are going to end up with a lot better joints. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to stitch all the way down this side using a scant 1/4 inch seam, and we're going to flip it around and we're going to stitch all the way down the other side. So now I've got to set my sewing machine up. Now I'm going to move it over to my regular 1/4 inch stitch. And then I'm going to do one more thing, because I want to sew a scant 1/4 inch seam. So that's just a teeny little bit smaller than your regular 1/4 inch seam. It gives us a little bit extra wiggle room, so we know we're going to get pieces that are the right size in the end. To do that on my machine, all I do is I hit one button and my needle moves one needle width to the right. I'm now at 6.0 instead of 5.5, and I'm able to sew with my regular standard presser foot. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm lining up that edge of the foot with that line, just like I showed you on the overhead camera, and then I'm going to remove that pin. I really only need it until I have everything in place underneath the sewing machine. Now I can go ahead and get going, and I'm just making sure I'm keeping the edge of that presser foot in line with that line that I drew. All right, I'm getting to the point where I've hit my extra needle for that middle one, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that out. Now again, I typically will line these up as I go, so once you get the hang of it, you definitely can do that. All right, we're coming down to the end, and I want to make sure that I'm sewing right into that corner. That way my flying geese at the end is going to also be going right into that corner. And I always keep my finger in line on the other side of that. That way I can make sure I'm sewing a straight 1/4 inch seam all the way down. All right, so you can chain stitch these to make it go faster. I could lift it up and I could sew the next one right through. I'm just gonna do one for the tutorial. So what I'm gonna do, and this is what you do when you get to the very end, flip it around, line it up again with the edge, and start sewing. All right, so we're gonna do a quality check here. What we wanna do is measure the distance of our seam, and that should be at a 1/2 inch or ideally a little bit less with that scant 1/4 inch seam. I'm gonna go ahead and flip mine over because I think you'll be able to see better on camera with that white on the green. But if I line up the edge of the ruler, even with my first stitch line, I'm just a hair under a 1/2 inch. I'm not quite to 3/8. I'm sort of right in between the 1/2 inch and the 3/8 mark, which is a perfect place to be. That means I'm not going to have any issues when it comes time to cut this apart with seams being too short, and I also am not going to have problems with my block being too small because I've eaten up too much with the seam allowance. Now this is a big quality checkpoint. If you measure and you are right at or over, if you're right at, you're probably okay. But if you are over a 1/2 inch, you have done something wrong. You got to go figure out what's going on with your seam allowance, and you need to redo it because it is never going to turn out to be the right size. But if you are smaller than 3/8 of an inch, you also need to go check out your seam allowance because it's going to be too tiny with your seam allowance, and then you might have problems where the seams split open on you when you go to quilt it or just with use. So now it's time to cut this apart, and I want to cut apart right down the center on that line that I drew. Now if you get off a little bit, it really isn't the end of the world because we already have our accuracy from cutting it, but you don't want it to be too skinny, again, because that seam can pop open with use, and then, or even just loading it on the quilting long arm. If it's too much stress and the seam is too skinny, that sucker will pop open. So cut them apart, and now we're gonna press. All right, so now it's time to press these open, and it's gonna look a little weird if you've never done it before. We're gonna create something that looks a little bit like a heart. So what I do is I always press these seams open. I find you get a lot better accuracy with pieces that are the right size when you're all done than if you press them to the side. So I started doing that when I started quilting my own quilts, and I started to notice the differences that made for a better quilt at the end. And then when I'm done, I hit it from the main side to get that seam super nice and flat. I'll go over that one more time just in case you need another visual. What you're gonna do is you just open that up with your fingertips. Then you're gonna put the tip of your iron straight down the center. Watch it when you get to this section that you don't flip any of those little corners back. and then just go straight down. What you're looking for is a nice straight line here. If you have a wiggle anywhere, then that means that you have a pleat on the other side and it's not going to turn out the right size. So make sure you fix that before you move on. All right, so at this point, you might be thinking, Stephanie, you lost your mind. This is no way this is gonna be a flying geese. Let me show you. It starts to look like one here. All right, so if I put that down the center, I've got my line. We're again gonna sew down both sides. And you can see that I've got a flying geese there and a flying geese here. So we're gonna get 4 at a time with no waste. So you scrap savers, you're not gonna hardly waste anything with this quilt. All right, now if you want to, you can pin that. Again, I would pin it up here and then also down here. I'm just gonna run these through. And again, what I like to do is just stack them up and just run them through. Go down one side of all of them and then go back up the other side. They look like little flags flapping in the wind for a little while, but it all turns out and it looks fabulous. All right, so I'm still working with that scant 1/4-inch seam. Sewing all the way down. And I really want to slow down because what should be happening is I should be coming right out at the point where those, the little dip where my valley is created there. And you'll see that a little better when I show you when we cut these apart. But what I can do next is just lift up and we're going to chain stitch this right on down. Saves a lot of thread, saves a lot of time. And you can just whip them all out. All right, once you get through all of them, you're just gonna pull your thread out a little bit. You don't even need to cut it. And you're just gonna position it so we can now sew down the other side of that drawn line. Now you're gonna need to do a little finagling with the next one to get it lined up. So what I like to do is sew all the way off of the first one and then reposition the next one. So that way I've got a great 1/4-inch seam from the start. All right, so this is exactly where your stitching line should be coming out, right where this little valley is created by the tiny little triangle up here and then also here. So it should be coming straight out. And if you've done that, you're probably going to be okay. Again, this is a good quality checkpoint where you're going to want to measure the distance between your seams. And you should be right in between that 3/8 and 1/2 inch if you've done a good scant 1/4-inch seam. If it is larger than 1/2 inch, you're going to have a problem. If it is smaller than 3/8 of an inch, you're going to have a problem. So right in that sweet spot is perfect. All right, now I'm just going to go ahead and cut that down the center. Just like before, it isn't super important that we are exactly on the line that we drew, but we also don't want to have too skinny of a seam. Anything that's 1/8 of an inch or less, you're going to have issues with down the line. So do be careful with that. All right, we're going to press these and then we just have to trim them up and our flying geese are all done and ready to complete our block. I pressed this seam open as well. So again, I'm just going to open that up with my fingertip and then head straight down the center with the iron. You do want to lift and press when you come to that corner because we don't want to accidentally flip these seams going the wrong way. So when I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and press from the other side as well just to get it super nice and flat. All right, I'm going to go ahead and repeat that for my other ones, but you can see I've got a nice flying goose unit there. We still find flying geese when it's just one, but still, that's what it is. So I'm going to press my other ones, then we're going to trim these up and we're ready to complete our block. So now it's time to give these a good trim. And I know it's tempting to skip this. I definitely did for one entire quilt when I was a newbie and I regretted every minute of not trimming them. So what you want to do is we need to get this trimmed, in this case exactly to 2.5 by 4.5. And you may be thinking, Stephanie, it practically is 2.5 by 4.5. But let me tell you, it makes a difference when you get that nice and square. So what I'm doing here is I am lining up the 2.5 inch mark with my ruler with the bottom of my piece here. And then I'm making sure that 4.5 is even with the edge over here. And then this is a critical part. I'm making sure that the seam here is coming right to the point where 2.5 meets the edge of my ruler. That means your point is going to go truly to the point of your triangle, and you might have some issues if you don't do that. And also, it's a good idea, but not super critical, because I'm going to show you how to fudge it. Ideally, your 1/4 inch should be right even with the point to the edge. Now that's not the case in my case here, but I'm going to fudge that a little bit later and I'll show you how. So I'm going to go ahead and trim up the side and off the top. And so that didn't take too much off, just a couple slivers here and there, and the dog ears, but it's gonna make a big difference. A little bit that didn't come here. All right, so now I'm gonna do that on 180-degree flip. So now I'm gonna measure it. So I've got my 4.5 exactly even with the edge I just cut, and my 2.5 exactly even with the edge I just cut. And there's one more thing I'm looking at. My 45-degree line of my ruler should be going exactly down the seam, and again, that'll make sure that my corner is exactly in the corner so that our points look fantastic when we're all said and done. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and give that a trim, and give that a trim. Now, if you are finding that your piece is moving a little bit on you, like when you get to those corners, if it's kind of, the fabric slides up a little, it means it's time to change your rotary cutter blade, and it can't go through that very easily. All right, so you can tell we did not trim that much off. There's only little bits here, but if I'm gonna take and put it next to it, there is a visible difference between our first one and our second one, and this one is gonna be so much easier to match up and get nice flat blocks versus this one if we didn't take that extra step. So I know it's a pain, I know nobody likes doing it, but you know what, you can take a cute, fun picture of all your scraps in a pile and post it to Instagram, and people will love it because it'll be a rainbow of little scrappy bits. So I'm gonna finish trimming these, then we're gonna move on to the next bit. All right, I've got a problem child here. So I'm gonna take this as a learning lesson slash here's how you fudge it when it doesn't come out quite right. So this one is just a hair under 4.5 inches on the bottom. And it's pretty close, but it's not all the way there. Now it's less than 1/8 of an inch off, so I can fudge that no problem. If it's more than that, then you're gonna need to remake it. But what I'm gonna do here is I'm going to line it up with my edge even on here, just like I normally would, but I'm not gonna worry about it not getting all the way over to 4.5. I'm just gonna pretend that it's there, and I'm not gonna fuss with it too much. So I'm gonna go ahead and square up that side. Now I'm gonna do my flip just like I normally would. And I'm gonna line everything up also like I normally would. So I'm getting my 45-degree line going straight down that center. And I'm getting this 2.5 lined up as I normally would as well. Now you can see again, I'm not all the way out to 4.5 here. That's okay, we're gonna fudge that when we put it together. So now I'm gonna go ahead and give myself a little trim, get off those dog ears, make sure that all my points are going truly to the points. When we just know that this one is a little skinnier, so when we attach it, we're just gonna ease this a little bit. So you can see that this is on the bias, so it will ease out just a little bit, and it will give us the extra little bit that we need in order to make that fit, and it will go on just fine. Let me actually just grab this so you guys can see. So if I lay this on top, you can see that it's just a little bit too short. But what I can do is when I start sewing that, and I'll actually do that next, is I can start sewing here. And once I get a couple of stitches in, I can take this and I can just make my corners match, and that'll give it just a little bit of a tension. It'll ease it in, and once you press it, no one will ever know. You can also do a little bit of easing in like this if you're a tad bit too large. So if you are less than 1/8 of an inch too large, but you want to make sure your points go to the corners, you can totally do that and fudge that as well. Just you're going to be easing in a little bit instead of easing out. So totally okay if they're not super perfect, as long as it's within that 1/8 of an inch either way, too small or too big, wiggle room. You do want to try and though and make sure that you're at 2.5 inches, because this is not going to move as much as this part here will, because this is on the bias, and you can make that work for your favor. All right, so now that we're done sewing our flying geese, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch my sewing machine back to my regular 1/4 inch stitch. I only want that extra wiggle room when there's anything I need to trim down, because I'd rather trim a little extra off than not have enough to trim at all and be too small. So what I'm going to do is just what I showed you, is I'm lining up those first corners, and I'm going to go ahead and get started stitching that. And then once I'm a few stitches in, I'm just going to line up these bottom 2 corners, and I'm just going to put my fingertip on that. You could also pin it if that is easier for you. And then when I get to the bottom, I'm going to move my hand to the side. That way I can maintain that 1/4 inch stitch all the way down. Now I'm going to repeat that on the other side, sewing my other flying geese to that side. You also will have a couple where you have a rectangle that you're attaching your Flying Geese unit to. Those are for the tops and bottoms of about half of your rows, depending on which pattern you're doing. All right, I'm gonna press these seams open as well. And I'm just gonna do one side at a time. Now, I'm doing a lot of lifting and pressing here. I don't just wanna slide my iron over, because we've got a lot of seams at this point, and I don't wanna accidentally flip something going the wrong way. So what I like to do is just get everything sewn on first to both sides, and then come over and give it a press all at once. So I just wanna make sure that I'm keeping my iron away from the other sections, so I'm not flipping anything, going a weird way. And then I'm gonna give a press from the other side as well. Get it nice and flat. All right, so now we've got one flying lantern done. These look really pretty when they're all together, especially since we really have an opportunity to let those smaller prints really, because the colors really mimic. Like we've got the pink in the butterfly wings, we have the green in the floral, we have this little limey in some of the wings, and so it really just complements it and helps bring out all the colors that are inside and really makes it a lot of fun. All right, I'm gonna press this one as well. All right, so make sure you refer to your pattern, Floating Lanterns, which you can get at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com to figure out how many of each of these you need. You're gonna need some large ones and you're gonna need some half ones. And the half ones are for the top and bottom of those vertical rows on about every other one. What it does is when we line this up, we're gonna have one row will start with a half and then the next row is going to start with the full. That way we're not going to have any points to match up. It's just going to be fabulous. So really we've done the hardest work that there is to do by creating all those Flying Geese, and from here on out we can just cruise and get this quilt done. Now, part of the reason why there's no seams to match is because we're going to have a little stashing strip at the bottom in between rows, or in between our blocks. Now, not everyone is going to have this. If it's at the bottom of a row, it's not going to have it. So make sure you're referring to your pattern again so you know how many need to have this. But essentially what we're going to do is we're going to flip it right sides together and we're going to sew it down. But there's a trick to this to make sure you don't lose those points. I always sew it with the block side up, because what I want to do is sew just one seam width to the side of where that point is, because I want it to come right over just to the side of where that point is, and that will help make sure that I never lose any points. So, and some of those where I didn't have my full 1/4 inch, I'm just going to fudge it a little bit, and I'm going to make sure that I'm coming just to the side of that, and then I'll get back to my 1/4 inch. And in most cases, you'll never know from the front that you made that adjustment. My quilts are always incredibly flat. Everything looks great, because I would rather have it be off just the teeniest bit on the inside where no one is ever going to see than on the outside where it looks like I cut off my point and all that hard work was for nothing. So I'm going to go ahead and sew my 1/4 inch seam down here, and then our block is done and we can get our quilt together. Now, I don't ever pin these. I just get it started and then I line up my corners kind of like I did when I was stretching things out. All right, so I'm going to kind of zoom along, and then I'm going to slow down when I get to that point, because I want to make sure I'm sewing right just one needle width to the right of that point so we don't cut it off. And then I'll sew all the way down. And again, I would chain piece all of these. I'm going to do one entire row at a time when I get my top together, so that way I can really just rock and roll and just start to get to quilt top assembly. So that's going to be really fun. All right, I'm going to go ahead and give this a press, and again I'm pressing the seams open. It's going to take a little bit extra with that point, but we will lose less and everything will be truer to size if you do it that way. You can always hit it with a little bit of a spray mister if you want, and that is always helpful. We actually have our own spray misters now that you can purchase for sale on our website, so we'll make sure to link to those. All right, so here is the spray mister. It is from Nifty Notorious. It works just like the one I've been using forever and ever. What you do is you fill it up with water, and then you can just give it, it's the first time I used it, so it takes a minute to get in there. Just give it a little mist, and so it comes out as a fine water droplet, and so it's not going to have drips and drops all on your fabric. But if you are like me and you don't ever want to put water in your iron because you don't want it to ever spit, then this is a really good alternative to that, to really get a nice flat seam without worrying about it. I mean, this is just flat as flat can be, even though we have, you know, a point pointing down. That's a lot of seams coming there. here, but it is flat, like really flat. And so I love these. I've been using another version for a long time, and you guys always ask where you can get it. Well, you can now get it from us. So check that out over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. Well, I hope that you have enjoyed today's tutorial. I hope that you are challenged to give 4 at a time no waste flying geese a try. This is a really easy pattern to give it a go with because you don't have to match any of those points once you're done getting them together, and you really just get to really practice on getting them good. And make sure you're following our tips and those sort of quality checks in between, so that way if you do go wrong, you know where it was. It was either you cut them to the wrong size, you sewed your seam at too wide or too skinny, or you had some issues with pressing. So anywhere in those areas it can go wrong. Hopefully those fudge tips will help as well. I mean, you can see here, I can't even tell which one was too short because they both are coming together really well, because I was able to kind of ease that in because of that bias. So it works out really, really well. Again, make sure you check out Stashin with Stephanie if you're not already a member. You get the Fat Quarter bundle every month, plus a free pattern like this one, and access to all the other free patterns that we've come out, exclusive discount codes you get for the fabric, and then also for my book, Fat Quarter Workshop, and you get first dibs, because I'm not sure how much of this is going to be left by the time our Stashin with Stephanie members get their hands on it, because they have been buying to finish their quilts lately like crazy, and we give them first dibs, so I'm not sure how much will be left for everybody else who comes in. So make sure you check that out over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. If you do join and you like this pattern, you are not going to get this fabric in your first bundle. We've already shipped it all out to our subscribers for this month. So you're going to want to get a full kit if that's available, because you are getting different fabric next month when we ship it out around the 20th. All right, well, I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you want to challenge yourself, give these 4 at a time no waste flying geese a try, and until next time, happy quilting. I just feel like I'm a hot mess whenever I'm filming, like every time.